So what's the one book that you bought me? Extreme Ownership.
Is that the one?
Yeah, it's a good book, but told me a lot about you.
Oh, the books you buy for people says a lot about you. Yeah. I think you got me a book about philosophy on the toilet. I'm trying to figure out what that says about you now.
It's Lewis and Clark, exploring Christianity through practice, theology, and philosophy. It's Lewis and Clark.
We said we talk about faith formation in young people.
Yes.
How do young people find faith and grow in faith?
Going to go straight for
Go on then. Yes.
Because their parents have faith. Basically, you grow up in a Christian home, therefore you're a Christian. Job done. That's certainly, or certainly an atheistic kind of attempted takedown would be.
Yeah.
Well, you only believe that because your parents told you, and it's wormed its way into your brain when you were small, and now you believe that it's true, and you've never really sat back and thought about it. And had you grown up in a different culture, you would believe other things, and therefore it's all bunkum and rot.
Yes, and statistically that is true. Just as if you grew up in an atheist home, you would probably be an atheist. You grow up in an atheist household, you're usually an atheist because your parents are atheists. And that's not shocking. If I had been born in India, in an Indian family who were Hindus, I'd probably be a Hindu. So there is some veracity to that. But that doesn't mean many things. I use the atheist as an example. I think often atheists take this view, and it's also a secular view, that I'm going to bring up my kids and they can have exposure to all different beliefs, and then they're free to choose the one they want to choose. That's just rubbish. That's not what happens. Most kids growing up, they're not. Firstly, that never happens. And even if it did, most of the time, they're like, well, this is what Dad believes, so I guess I'll believe that, because that's what most people do. Finding your own faith often comes later in life. So this is one of the important things. So if you want your children to be Christians, the best thing to do is to introduce them to the Christian faith when they're young. Now, an atheist might think that's just scandalous religious programming, but it's no different
they
than
do.
their religious programming.
There's no might about that. That's often the concern that would be aired is that you're not giving them the free choice to decide for themselves. Yeah, I'll be interested to know what you think of from my kids. I've made it sort of, we go to church. That's what we do as a family. Yeah, absolutely. Sunday, week in, week out. That's what we do. But at the same time, we didn't baptize our kids. We said, we want you to be able to make a decision for yourselves later on. So we've sort of flagged to them, right now, this is where we go, this is what we do. You ask any questions you've got, you engage with what's going on, but ultimately you should know that what's coming down the tracks is that you will be making this decision for yourself. You cannot do it based on what Mum and I have done. Have we done all right? That's brilliant. Okay. Because I genuinely don't know if there's... you tell me, because you've done the research here. I've not. So I don't know if that's the right or wrong, or if there's a better way to do it. I've actually done lots of research on this area. So, what options have you got, really? So if you said, well, I don't want to impose my faith upon my kids, firstly, why would you be imposing it if you believed it and you thought it was the most important thing in the world? I think, from my perspective, to answer that one would be to say, I think because I know you can't use somebody else's faith. It's your own decision, and I think so. That's why I think it's basic faith stage development. Yeah, kids have got to own it themselves and grow into it, or they'll never be their own. And they'll in another podcast we think life will happen to them, and they'll realise they don't have any faith of their own, and it'll collapse on them because they haven't got their own foundations. Because they haven't got their own. And again, that's what often the atheists don't understand. They think that faith is superstition. They think it's intellectual beliefs in the flying spaghetti monster. They don't understand it's a way of life and meaning and purpose and experiences that because they don't take the time to look at it. Just as for many people who are atheists, we can come up with crude stereotypes about atheists, but a lot of them have profound and deep
understandings of their atheism that they will not suspend with their kids. So they don't say to their kids, well, here's a book, you can read about all these different religions, including atheism, and you decide what you want. If the kid goes, well, what do you think, Dad? They're going to see, firstly, he's going to share what he thinks, but they're also going to see how he lives. Mm-hmm. And that's the bigger picture for how faith is. So you've got very few choices. Well, maybe a range of choices. So you're Christians, and you don't want to impose your faith upon your kids. Well, what do? You go to church, and let's say you have a vigorous and rigorous Christian faith. Do you exclude your children from that? That would be bizarre, wouldn't it?
Well, that would seem
to do. Or you reduce your faith down to Christianity, something I occasionally do and believe, which is a very secular English view of it. Occasionally go to church. It's believing that Jesus maybe died and rose from the dead, but don't let it interfere with your life too much. And then let them pick and choose between all the other religions. Well, actually, you're imposing an understanding of religions even by doing that with them. So there are some amazing surveys, and I think they're incredibly informative because they're not just hypotheses and hypothecating and wishful thinking and philosophies of child.
Don't decry the philosophy.
Childhood rearing. But what actually happens? So the British Social Attitudes Survey, if I've got that around the right way, the government commission research across the country all the time into thousands of different things to see what people's attitudes are and what they believe and what they're doing. So everything from, and that includes things like religious affiliation is one of the things. And there's massive research in it. And a few years ago, some of the research came out about what happens to young people and the practicing of religious faith. And I'll get the statistics, I won't get them accurately, but broadly right. If you grow up in a Muslim family, Jewish family, Hindu family, Buddhist family, the chances are later in life, even if you're non-observant and practicing it, because of a multiplicity of factors, but culturally and relationally. Mm-hmm. Because for those religious groups, often the religion is it's not just a belief in their head, it is a part of their culture, often their ethnicity and their family way of life. Young people brought up in that environment, an enormous number, and actually even Catholics have a high percentage of people that come back to the Catholic faith, even if they were non-observant.
Because it's more integrated by the sound
Because it's more of a way of life,
yeah. Okay.
Which is what religion is supposed to be, as opposed to the anemic Western English secular version of just like a religious instruction lesson. Believe the 5 pillars of Islam for Islam, or here's what happened to Jesus. So for your average white middle-class Christian, what happens is children who grow... So all those other faiths show that even if you're not engaging in your faith from your family of origin, when you are older and life happens, you get married, you have kids, there is a very high chance that you will turn back to, for familial and cultural identity reasons, into the religion of your family of origin. White middle-class young people don't do that. The statistic is staggering. It's the opposite. That when you get something like 95% of young people never consider any Christian antecedents that may have come from them from their family of origin, because there's other research that you can correlate with this. Because what they end up doing is they actually practice the faith of their parents, and the faith of their parents is that you can believe whatever. Look, the idea that, like you started off with, well, it really doesn't matter what you believe. There's nothing ethnically or culturally. Most people, if they're nominal Christians, go Christmas and Easter, but it doesn't really affect their everyday life. They're not praying, and they're not doing observances, and there's Christian food or nothing that would connect them. And often what their kids see is, if my parents ever did engage in something pseudo-Christian from my family of origin heritage, it's when there's a crisis or there's a funeral or I've run out of the resources for life.
So what does it look like to get it right then? I mean,
it's not just that people that aren't Christians are leaving their children in a situation where they'll never find any sort of faith, because they won't. Christians are practicing their faith in increasing numbers in ways that are making it even harder for young people to find faith and even go back to faith later on in life. So that, because the statistics show, and this is really important and beyond wishful thinking, because I was saying there was always an outlier. There's always someone who grew up in a home where the parents didn't do anything, and despite that met with God, and God, yes, he can meet with anyone. Yeah. But that's not what happens in everyday life. The three things, I think it's three things, see if I can remember these, that have the greatest likelihood of somebody experiencing the Christian faith and practicing it for the rest of their lives. First one is to do it when they're young. Most important, whatever we experience when we're young is what we carry with us through the rest of life.
Okay.
So the idea, I was teaching somewhere once, and this guy literally said to me, well, I was teaching on some of this stuff, and he said, well, I don't do that. I said to my kids, they can make up their own mind. We're never taking them to church with us, and one day they can go whenever they want to. And I said, you are almost guaranteeing that your children will never find faith. And he got very argumentative. And I go, it's just a fact. It just doesn't happen. Why would they? What they've learnt from you is, this has nothing to do with my everyday life. So starting when you're young, there's all the aphorisms and phrases about, if you want to see the man, see the boy, see the child, if you want to form someone, we know they're the most formative. We spend all of our lives, we go through therapy. What are the things we deal with in therapy? It's the first 10, 15 years of our adolescent life that we deal with. Is deeply formative. So it needs to start when you're young.
Got it.
To have a good start.
Young'uns.
Number one. Number two, it needs to involve your parents or parent or whoever is your carer looking after you, because they are the most important person in your development. And if the person who is caring for you has a vibrant Christian faith, one that is part of life, in terms of meals, food, relationships, making decisions. If that is part of the environment that a child grows up in, it rubs off on them. But even that bond can be easily broken. There's a third thing that it's not even a Venn diagram. Put the three things together, and it sort of catalyzes the statistical likelihood of a response. And it's a relationship with somebody else outside of your parents who are significantly engaged in your life as Christians.
Okay.
Because there's all the things that go on developmentally with parents. And part of that's also about plausibility structures. It's why, here's another thing about how do people come to faith. Bigger churches, it's easier to be a Christian in a big church because you've got more people around you living the Christian life in a way that makes sense. It's much harder to be the only young person in a church when everybody else around you says this thing is ridiculous that you're doing. So relationships are key. So those are the three factors together that give you the statistical greatest chance. But I would say more than that, it's the natural of order of things as a Christian. If you're a parent, you should be practicing your faith with your child, and they should be experiencing it in the wider church community, so that gives them the greatest opportunity to engage with it. And ultimately, like you said, come to the point where, in terms of faith development, the next step is not just that they're Christians because their parents were Christians. I always wanted my kids to get to the point where they would own their own faith.
Yeah.
Get baptized.
Yeah, absolutely. So in summary then, it sounds like, if I can sort of replay back what I'm hearing, you can tell me if I'm wrong. Obviously, the young one, get them winning young, if you like. That was an easy one. Start young. The authority figure in their life, whoever that happens to be, parent, grandparent, carer, guardian, that kind of thing. Yeah. And then something, like you said, a third relationship or set of relationships that are in the kind of peer or somebody who's almost independently verifying that sort of setup that you've had as actually there's validity
beyond
to that. Because as you say, developmentally, especially into the teenage years, when you're sort of starting to question your parents' sort of way of thinking, or just because it worked for them, does that actually work for me? Who am I? I'm separating my identity from my parents at this point. So
exactly,
what identity do I want to take on? And having somebody else who can act as a proxy to demonstrate that lifestyle and all those things too is actually the thing that's going to potentially, like you said, increase the likelihood of cementing that in.
Yes, and that's without even the factor of, well, what does God do then? I mean, if nothing, if we're trying to sow seeds into your kids' lives. Do you sow anything that God could water and that would take root in your children's lives? So that's the statistical thing. There's also, I mentioned earlier about what children inherit, and you do inherit often the faith of your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the fastest growing groups in our Western context are white middle-class Christians who their Christian faith is an optional lifestyle choice. And they increasingly engage in church in fewer and fewer, the mission of the church, as in if the gospel of Christianity is a way of living, they engage in it less and less. And that often means the only thing they do is go to church, and they do that with less frequency. I always find it strange, not ironic, that people who leave church because they say church should be more than a Sunday, usually that's the only thing that they do. So they turn up when they need something, or there's nothing else going on. They also then reach out for prayer. I mean, I forget, we've done a few of these podcasts now. When I see some people turn up in our services, my thought is, it's lovely to see them. I haven't seen them for months. And then my second thought is, what on earth has happened to them? Something catastrophic. Is it divorce? Is it a serious illness? Because some people will only engage with other people in the Christian faith, and that includes a worship service, when their normal resources for life have run out. Now, if you occasionally go to church, and if you're not got a way of life with other people, and you're not taking risks for the kingdom of God, and you're not doing all the things that Christians as a Christian way of life, what happens is your children inherit that. So what they learn is, okay, I notice my parents, their Christian engagement is that, and that's what they learn. They often don't learn, who else are they going, unless they have significant relationships with someone else in the church. They're likely, and if their parents are always traveling or going away or doing hobbies. Another thing that you often see is, again, this pressure on parents. I'm sure you feel it, your kids are a lot younger than mine, to take them to all these clubs and activities and all these things, and somehow you're an abusive parent if you don't give them this plethora of opportunities. The idea that you might focus, and if you do focus down, it's because it's swimming or football, because you're hoping they might be an Olympic swimmer, or and the cost of money and the discipline that parents will expend to get up early in the morning or evenings or weekends to take their kids to sports and activities. And I see Christians doing this. They would never engage the Christian faith with their children in the same way they do in those hobbies and sports. And here's what their children ultimately learn. Those are the important things of life. Christianity is optional. The idea that you might not do some other activities to practice Christianity is ridiculous to some people.
So what then do you say to somebody? There's loads of philosophical stuff that ties in with this, and they would take longer than we have on the podcast.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go full tilt into any of those, particularly around in kind of God being just. If what you're saying is correct, then there's a sense in which
it is correct.
No, sorry. Given what you're saying is correct.
Okay.
If that then is played out continually, where is the you mentioned this earlier. It's quite a difficult thing to articulate without trying to lead, which is why I'm struggling to articulate this myself. There are outliers of people who meet God who. For whom there is no prior. You're one such person. Abraham was one such person, so far as we know. Does this not lead us to a place where it's sort of too much emphasis on the parent? Okay, that it's sort of it removes the need for the individual to say, I will actually engage with the question of who God is, right?
Yeah.
And so
because you can do all of that and still your kids. You can do all the things I've said, and your kids will still go, no,
because somebody could say, well,
don't want to, not interested.
The typical argument is, well, God. You say that the Christian faith is the only way to God, and therefore, if somebody grew up in a Muslim household and that's the thing that they revert to, have you not just consigned them to that by virtue of where they were born in that place and space in history. And I suppose that's the one I didn't particularly want to go full depth into, but it feels related to, say, you're almost a product of what your parents have put in place for you as a child.
Yeah, well, you are, which is why it's really important. What kind of faith are you living, believing, practicing, and what faith are you reflecting on with your kids? So if you bring up your kids, and some Christians do this, there are different forms of Christianity, the world is evil, wicked, hide away from it, everyone's going to hell. Well, you have to make a choice. You become that kind of Christian. Or if you go off to university, meet some friends, and suddenly you realize these people aren't all evil and wicked, and I'm not sure they're all going to hell. And that's when this is the faith stage development. That's when people will often jettison the faith of their parents. And it can cause ruptures in religious families, especially strictly Christian families. So what kind of faith are you passing on to your children? I mean, again, the research says there's a thing called therapeutic moralistic deism, and that broadly is the sort of white Western version of Christianity that young people are being given. And it's that God is therapeutic. God is there to make you feel better. So you engage with God when you're not feeling good. I want to feel better about myself. Moralistic is to, because some parents don't want our kids taking drugs and behaving badly. So God's there to just, generally not do the really bad things in life. And deism is actually God is not present and the author of your life. He made the world and disappeared, and he's the God of the gaps, and he just intervenes when you need a top up from him. And that's often what parents are passing on. So, but then, so I see with you, I mean, does this break the fourth wall? With your kids, you talk with them, you reflect on them, you let them ask questions. This goes back to the podcast on why do theology. If you don't think through your faith, it's going to be very hard when your kids want to think it through.
To know theologically and maybe philosophically, but to be rooted and grounded in your faith. Because you might be the person that acts as the friendly uncle or aunt to somebody else who's asking questions. You may say, well, I don't have children of my own, and that might be true, and that might be where you are, but you are, in some sense, almost certainly going to have influence to the kids within, say, your church. And you've said this, I think, from the front. Certainly, I feel like you, maybe Bev, have that they're not the kids of the parents. They're the kids of the kids of the church.
These are
our kids.
Yes,
and they're our kids for that reason.
Yes,
that it takes a village to raise whole village to raise a child.
Exactly.
This is our village. This is our family. It's our family business, if you like, is to bring these kids on and to be able to answer their questions, to be able to encourage them and to.
If you think about it, when's
the
best time to learn how to explore the Christian faith when you have kids? It's a leading question. Maybe before you have kids is the time to do it. So engage in children's ministry. And when you have kids, you may have a raft of experiences that would equip you to do it. But you're absolutely right. We talk in our church, there's again this Western obsession. As long as my kid is okay and they get what they're after, that's all I'm focused on. When actually these are all our kids.
Yeah.
And also they're the friends of my kids and the kids of the church of the future, church of the present. So I'm pretty blunt on this one because
I hadn't picked that up. It was really subtle throughout that you
because the statistics.
Yeah, well, it matters, right?
Bear it out, and the anemic faith. There's actually another bit of research that I found. It's from New Zealand, Presbyterian Church. The guy that was the head of youth work and training for the Presbyterian Church, but isn't anymore. I forget his name. But it's a fascinating bit of research on, they're probably what you would call older millennials now. So they're millennials who are in their 30s and had kids.
Me?
Yes, like you.
I am. I'm right on the line. Fun fact. 1981, right to the point they started calling us millennials, apparently. Yes.
Well, there's a whole load of them that he managed to find who actually have parents of a generation who threw them into sports and clubs and hobbies and dropped out of church, and their parents are no longer connected. So he found all these young people whose parents just were Christians and then just can't be bothered.
Okay.
CBA, as you call it.
Yep.
And they've been finding their way back to church because guess what? They've had kids. And actually, there are some of them who have enough of a repository from when they were younger to go, despite my parents' complete indifference to the Christian faith that they now have, is that a move of God? I mean, that bucks...
It bucks the trend.
This is what I was the trend in that instance.
This is what I was trying to drive at with my question earlier. Because I don't dispute the statistics. I don't.
Yeah.
But it doesn't... there's a sense in
But again,
which...
they're young people who are reactivating something that they inherited. It's not a group of young people who've never been near church in their life.
I don't...
who have suddenly...
Right. I don't think that the norm that you're describing is like, apropos of nothing. I woke up this morning and I thought, what if God's real? And I found myself in church. I mean, yes, there are stories, there are testimonies that are like that. Yeah. Of course. But the kind of the Gaussian distribution, the normal, the middle of the thing is you probably are something about your environment is going to shape this conversation. What I suppose I would want to leave space for is those moments where you as an individual do still need to take responsibility, or there are those moments where there is a revival, there is a move of God. There is something that bucks the trend, that completely defies the statistics.
You see, revivals are interesting because even then, revivals usually take place historically not with groups of people who have no Christian heritage or knowledge. It is usually revivals, the greatest outpourings of the Holy Spirit upon people who have some understanding of Christianity and some reservoir, a repository of it. They're never in contact with people who have, never went to church and their family had nothing to do with church. They're usually at times when people have drifted away. So if there was to be a revival in this country now, again, historically, it would be the 30 to 50-year-olds who have just drifted away from church and couldn't be bothered, who might realize that instead of continuing on that trajectory, maybe the Holy Spirit will come and convict them and they've got something to revive.
Well, yes, the clue is in the word revival. Okay.
To be revived. I mean, a story popped into my mind of the benefits of this. I mean, in our church, it's wonderful. We see people become Christians. The ones that often struggle the most are the ones who have the least in their background to draw on, because it is so, to come to church regularly, to go to all these things that form you that were normal for Christians in history are so alien to them, because the whole life is wired to be the opposite. And they also don't have beliefs and practices. And the ones that tend to grow quicker as Christians often have something in their background to activate. So a good friend of mine in our church was in my karate club I used to go to, and I invited him to Alpha. He called himself an atheist, hated God, hated Christianity, gave me the hardest time. But ultimately, he'd grown up in Northern Ireland and had been forced to go to church, even though he absolutely hated every minute of it. He hated going, he hated the pastors, he hated the hellfire and damnation. But when he then had an experience of God, a genuine, his own probably first experiences of God in his 40s, and he asked me to explain what Christianity was, and we prayed together and he became a Christian, he was able to immediately open a Bible and turn to a verse with me, because opening a Bible and turning to a Bible verse was something, even though he'd hated it when he was young, was there to draw on. And his growth in the Christian faith was like this. It's like, even though all that stuff was there and he didn't like it, he could activate it. The Bible, basic beliefs, who was God, what Christian disciplines were. It was all there, even though it had come to him in a way that he had rejected. It's very hard to activate something you don't know, and that wasn't a habit. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
So to give your kids a fighting chance, you want to give them something that can be activated, become their own, revived later on in life.
But yeah, that's one step removed somehow.
Is it?
Yeah, because you don't do it for the kids, right? Because they're smart. They're going to see past that. If it's a facade,
Yes.
And it's not who you actually are. If it's not your actual way of life,
they
spot a hypocrite a mile off. Kids are amazing like that.
Yeah.
So to some degree, it's like get your own house in order. And I'm saying this as much to myself.
Yeah.
If you get your house in order, literally, I suppose, in this case, but you get yourself, right? And it becomes your way of life. And it's the non-negotiable in your life. And it's the thing you've invested in. It's the thing you continue to invest in. It's the thing that you let shape you. Then it becomes second nature to then share that with your nearest and dearest. I mean, how could you not at that point? Because it's like, well, in the same way as my music taste is not up for negotiation, neither is my faith. It's as good as, it's more core to me than music taste come and go. You change a little bit, but nonetheless, it's like, oh, I love this thing. Let me share this with you.
Yes,
you don't think twice when you're going to grab a link from Spotify or whatever and share it with a family or a friend or whatever. Oh, you'd love this song. You have a listen to this, right? And that's so second nature. It's where you go, okay, and then you something like, oh. Well, I mean, only if this Bible verse works for you. I mean, maybe have you thought about?
Yeah, and by the way, we don't do that with the rest of life. So with your kids, good parents don't do this with the rest of life. So whether you're an atheist or a Christian, things like if you think that telling the truth is important, you don't let your kids get away with that and go, well, you can choose whether you want to believe in the truth or not. You say to your kids, while you're in my house, we will practice truth telling. That's one thing good parents do. Other good things parents do. When your family, what it means to belong to your family. I mean, you know what it's like, kids. Sometimes they don't want to visit aunts and uncles and put them in the car and travel to places. You go, this is who we are, and you are doing this with us.
This is our family.
This is our family, because you know this is what families do. And it doesn't matter whether you're bored or interested or like it, because you know one day they will have no connection to your family unless you practice family.
Yes.
So we've got those orders of practice and interaction that we do for other things in life. Why would we not do them with our faith, with our kids?
It's Lewis and Clark, exploring Christianity through practice, theology, and philosophy. It's Lewis and Clark,